Welcome to the ParadoxWalk podcast, specializing in glitch in the matrix stories, paranormal activity, UFOs, cryptids, dream realities, or any strange and out-of-the-ordinary experiences. I like to tell stories of anything that makes you think or is completely out of the ordinary. Today's episode will be focusing on mirrors and dreams, mirrors and how they might be able to transport entities, or who knows what they can transport back and forth across different dimensions. And a story of a Wendigo or rake. It's difficult to tell those two things apart. Some people think Wendigos have antlers on their head. A story of one of these creatures that was stalking kids that were lighting off fireworks and jumping on a trampoline. First story here will be what we were talking about with the mirrors. Many of us have seen slightly disappointing Matrix Part 4, where they used mirrors to jump in and out of the Matrix. There seems to be some kind of truth to that. If you look into a lot of these paranormal things and stories like that involve these mirrors and things coming in and out. It makes me think of maybe that's why there's so many hauntings at department stores and places where they sell clothes, because of those big, huge, full-size mirrors. Bathrooms seem to be a big thing where people say that they have some kind of paranormal type encounter. Even Albert Rosales, the famed humanoid documenter or archiver, he archives all these humanoid encounters that people have. Some are even UFOs based. He has a story, and he tells it when he was a real young kid, that he, I think, just went into the bathroom for something, and he looked in the mirror and he said he saw a Spanish conquistador in the mirror, and he knew obviously that guy's not in the room, so he kind of looked around and there was nothing there, and then he turned around and I guess it just kind of after a while disappeared. You can hear him tell his story on some of these interviews. A lot of times when somebody asks Albert Rosales about if he had any paranormal activity, he talks about that. The first story I was going to get into was this. I guess it was a factory, some type of factory. They don't say what type of factory it is, but it was in, I want to say, somewhere Northern Europe. And I guess one guy that had this upper office, he was an overseer of the factory, or either they let him go or he wanted different hours or something. Something came up where he quit. They got a new guy in, and the new guy took over his office, and he ended up either taking off the management or taking off all the workers, and there might have been some kind of drama. He did something that was highly disruptive, and the company got rid of him and quickly called the other guy back, and he took it back. He gets to his office and he had two really creepy mirrors that were facing each other. So on the left side of the room was I think in his words, they were kind of creepy. And then on the right side, on the opposite. So his desk was in between them both. And he thought that was odd, but I guess the first day he didn't want to do anything with them. I guess he just left them there. They're just mirrors. No one would think to take them down or do anything with them. Real quickly, something happened where he started to just get super drowsy really, really fast and fell asleep really, really quick. And he just put his head down on the desk, and when he started to feel something, I think pushing on the back of his head or pushing his face into the desk or something like that. And he tried to take his hand and fight it off of him. And he was by himself in this office. And when he did, he felt like this arm was really, really strong. I don't know what ended up happening, where he turned around and looked, and he saw it was a spirit, darkened, almost what we would call a shadow person or something like that. And when he eventually fought this thing off, or saw the thing go into one of the mirrors, used the mirror to leave, and then I think in his desk he ended up finding all these occult symbols, little medallions and stuff like that. So I guess the guy before him that took the office did this on purpose. I think the guy, the first thing he did was got rid of those mirrors and stuff. That made me think of this story. It was called The Unfortunate Profession of Jonathan Hogue. I don't want to give away all of the story, because I would recommend that you can just listen to the audiobook online. It's pretty good. It's really interesting. I'm trying to explain this without doing too many spoilers, but eventually this guy ends up, it's almost like a mystery. This guy's trying to figure out what this guy does. This guy's losing his memory every day, and people are suspecting this Hogue character of being a really bad guy and all, and people around him are starting to figure out something really shady is going on with this guy. And this book was written, I think, in the 40s. Eventually what they end up doing is the people trying to solve this mystery are getting warned by different people here and there to stop searching this out, stop looking in this direction, almost like an adjustment bureau type thing, strange men, business suits coming in, don't be looking into Mr. Hogue, and don't talk to him, blah, blah, blah. And if you do, something bad will happen to you. Eventually in the story, they end up finding that mirrors in their house are being used by Adjustment Bureau, Men in Black type things to just walk in. I don't want to give away too much of it, but they end up taking the main character and pulling him through a mirror, and he ends up at this business board meeting room, like a board meeting room of a big company. And that's where they pulled him into, sat him down, give him the whole, like, we're going to threaten you type speech. They do something where they take his wife, trap her body essence, but leave her body, like, alive, shove him back into his house using his living room mirror. So they take him in the boardroom and just push him back into his living room. It's really interesting the way they do it in the book. They kind of describe it. And then there's some references to these so-called men that run this huge company as being like half bird, half men, or they are birds. And there's a strange little speech in this book where they just go on like, it's like they almost are saying code words or something, and they're just like businessmen. And you come to find out that they're a lot more than businessmen in a boardroom at a big company, that they're something else. I wonder how much of that is true in our world. Have any of us worked for any company and the people that were the bosses seem to not be human? Has that ever happened to anybody before? Check episode 1 here, and also any stories like that I'd love to hear at ParadoxWalkPodcast@protonmail.com. So something that I always thought was kind of fascinating about some of these things was like, what does a mirror actually do? Well, what it does is it bounces light. If you think about other things that bounce light, it's either like the surface of water or a metal. And what does a metal have? A metal has a lot of magnetism, or what people call electricity. But electricity, what it really is it's the North Pole and the South Pole magnetism in motion. And so it's that same power of a magnet, that same thing that you feel, that like is two magnets pushing against each other, is the same thing that is flowing through a wire. Because what does each magnetic or electrical generator have in common? They always have some kind of magnets inside that are spinning over and over, or they have something that's an acid melting a metal. So why would those two things be something that creates electricity unless it's something the acid pulls out of the metal and then it's done? But the difference is when something is spinning with a magnet, the magnet always recharges itself like instantaneously, and it never runs out of energy. So they're milking that system of a magnet. That magnet never runs out of, that's like its juice, and it like pulls it from somewhere else or whatever. So that's the same type of thing is happening with a mirror. I don't know exactly the details or how you can get that to work like that, but that same thing is the same thing that makes a metal shiny is the same thing that makes a mirror like reflect your image, it seems like. Or the same process is happening of some sort. So this is a story that was sent to me by somebody that experienced a couple strange things with mirrors. This guy started reading these astral travel books from his local library. He says either when he was in high school or just got out of high school, 18, 19 years old-ish. And one of the things that he mentions that was really strange about these books, or one of the books in particular, the author tried an experiment, because the author mentioned something along the lines of he wanted to try to like move physical objects from the astral body. He started by thinking about turning on a light switch from the astral dimension, like before he got back to his body. I guess this guy was kind of like an expert at all this stuff. And right before he went into his body, it was about 2 or 3 seconds later, the light would go on, even though like he did it some time back. And a similar story is reported on Reddit, which is strange. A man saying that he woke up after an astral travel and turned on his shower. And he like, just, when you wake up in the morning, I guess he was like flying around in the astral world or whatever. And then he like woke up in his body. And he just walked over to the bathroom and started a shower. And he was like getting ready for his day. And, when you're in the shower, sometimes you move around or like grab a shampoo or something. I guess this guy put his hand on his wall, the wall of the shower. When he put his hand on the wall, he actually fell through the wall and started like falling through like the inside of his house. And then he like fell right back into his body for a second time. And he woke up for what he thought it was like a false awakening. I've heard a lot of stories about this, like from people that like leave their body, that they have false awakenings. Like they'll get up and they'll go somewhere and do something, and then they'll find out that they're wake up again and do something again, like things like repeating and stuff like that. Like it's not just this one guy. So the weird part about this story is the guy actually wakes up, goes into his bathroom, and he finds the light on and his shower already running. So let's explain that, right? To get back to the first guy's story, so he said that in this book, where this author tried that light switch experiment, The author listed off like 3 main methods for so-called astral travel. The author said the easiest was to just basically figure out you're dreaming when you're inside of a dream, like a lucid dream, and just kind of fly around. And then it's widely thought by a lot of people that when you have a dream that's lucid and you're flying around, that you're basically astral traveling and you just don't know it. And you're pretty much there at that point. The second is to lay on your back and relax and just pop out. I guess that takes some skill or whatever. And the third, that seemed really strange, was to go backwards and down out where the skull meets the spine. This was one thing that the guy telling the story thought was odd. And he just thought about this part of the book like years later. I guess he had a rough day at work. He lived alone in his apartment. He just laid on his back and he was tired. He said he was completely sober, wasn't on anything, didn't even smoke weed. And he laid on his back and he said he was on his back for like 5 seconds. And then he just thought about that part of the book and he maybe thought about trying it for like 2 seconds. And he said something like pulled him out at that exact spot, like pulled him down and out right where the spine meets the skull. This guy did not fall asleep. He said, I did not fall asleep because I have a hard time sleeping anyway. All I did was lay on my back and thought about this book. And he said he was on the ground floor of his apartment and he went down anyway. And when he turned around, he said that he saw like a structure that resembled Stonehenge in England. And this guy was in the United States. And I asked him what, to describe all this scene. And he said it's like if you took a drone and like flew it over Stonehenge and there was like 10 guys in like fancy robes like in a circle at Stonehenge. Imagine just being like floating above it. And he said he knew it was like some kind of dream, but he couldn't understand how it happened. These guys, he said, were like beckoning him like, oh, come here, we're friends and blah, blah, blah. And they were kind of directing him to go into the center of the structure. So he floated down into the center of the structure and he was like, well, what's going on? And he said instantly one of the guys pulled out a full-size mirror out of nowhere. He said a second ago nobody had mirrors. And a second later, a guy pulled out a full-size mirror and just rushed him with it and pushed him back. And he was like, oh, this doesn't seem right. And so he turned around. And when he turned around, the other guy with the fancy robe, like he described these robes. He said they looked like royalty robes. Like some were black robes, some were white robes. They had different colors and they had like gold trim and they were really fancy looking. He said it looked like something like a king would wear or like a royalty or something. But anyway, so the other guy behind him pulls out a full-size mirror and rushes him too. And then the guys from the sides like all joined in and he said, I couldn't get past these mirrors. And I couldn't get past these guys and I was being pushed down and into the center of the ground of this pit. He said in the middle of this stone structure was a pit, and he was getting pushed into this pit, and it scared the crap out of him. And he said the only thing he could think of was to imagine myself. He said because he still remembered he was dreaming this or something like in one of these books was going on, and he said nothing in any of these books like prepared him for anything like that. This was all within a few seconds of just laying down. And he said the way he got out of it was he said to himself, like, I'm smaller. I can make myself smaller than any one of these molecules and any one of these mirrors. And he said he shrank himself down into a microscopic, like, pinpoint. And he flew through the mirrors and he flew through everything and he's like, I just went right back to my body. And he said he still went up. He still went up to his body and went into his body and he jumped out of bed. And one of the other things that he mentioned after this was that when his feet hit the floor, he said that it felt like underneath his feet that these guys were still kind of watching and targeting him for any other time if he was ever going to try something like that again, that he's like, there's no way I can prove that, but it seemed like they were waiting for him to try that again or make that mistake again. He's like, even though he didn't really do anything wrong, I asked him, like, did you do something to somebody or did you do something wrong? And he said the only thing he can think of is that these guys were just trying to trap people or they were like pure evil or something like that. He had no like enemies or anything that he could think of. He thought that if he ever did something like that again, that his little trick, they might be wise to it and it might not work. So that kind of scared him. And he said he never like purposely tried to astral travel or try anything like that in the books ever again.